I have a story I would like to share with you. It comes from the congregation where I served as a rabbi, but it happened before I actually got to that congregation back in the early 1970s. This congregation was big, and especially in the fall, during the Jewish high holidays, every seat was taken for worship. So many people would come to the synagogue, they even put seats in their downstairs auditorium. They put 800 seats in the downstairs auditorium to run a parallel service. So it was one Rosh Hashanah morning that a bomb threat was received. And the congregational leaders decided that the synagogue building had to be evacuated in the middle of the morning service. The rabbi upstairs in the sanctuary asked everyone to leave quietly and quickly. The rabbi downstairs in the auditorium did the same, and within no more than 15 minutes, the building was empty. Only one problem. Just before the evacuation, an older gentleman had excused himself to go to the restroom. As matters unfolded, it took about 15 minutes for what had to be done. And when the gentleman came back to the auditorium, there were not 800 people there. There was nobody. Was it magic? Was he dreaming? Not a soul to be seen. Of course, his family did return and they did pick him up. But can you imagine 800 human beings had disappeared? I tell you that story because it came to mind last weekend when the bombings took place in Sri Lanka. 3 churches, 3 hotels, hundreds dead and wounded, gone, disappeared. Can you imagine? This was no dream. This was a nightmare. I thought about Sri Lanka exactly 1 week ago, especially on Easter morning. I was driving through Longmeadow, and I saw people walking to church for the 10 a.m. service. Men and women dressed in their finest, little children all in their Sunday best. They approached the church, hopped up the stairs, and slipped into the bright, safe sanctuary. It was so easy and pleasant and comfortable. Except, some people would say it was absolutely not natural. A friend commented to me in the course of the days that followed that it seemed to him pain and chaos are the natural components of the human experience. The sun may shine, my friend claimed, but clouds obscure the sun as much as they let the sun shine through. Clouds are the norm. Humanity's inability to get along, that's the norm. Darkness is what characterizes most of human history. I hated hearing my friends' consideration. I hated reading about, even thinking about what happened in Sri Lanka. But I have to admit, there is something true about reading human experience as mainly a tale of darkness and strife. If that weren't so, I don't believe this cathedral would recently have invested in more cameras and more locks for the building on regular days. If life was altogether sweet, my own congregation in Sinai Temple wouldn't have locked its doors recently, installed a camera over the door and a buzzer so that only the right people can get into the sanctuary or get into the building on a weekday at all. As a Jew, it doesn't take too much to imagine that history really does come along with fear. My Toronto synagogue, the one I mentioned years ago, why do they have a bomb alert? Well, it's because some people hated Israel back then, and they wanted to take vengeance and get even with the Jews by bombing a synagogue. Oh, and come to think of it, only yesterday, outside San Diego, a synagogue was attacked and people lost their lives. Years ago, my wife Marcia and I traveled through Europe, and we didn't lose our microphone, but I'll try this again. Years ago, my wife Marcia and I traveled through Europe, and we decided we wanted to visit some synagogues in the course of our summer in Europe. Now that was difficult. You wouldn't think so. But almost every synagogue had armed guards, and unless you could prove your innocent intentions, there was no way you would get into the synagogue building. And this was years ago. The same was true that very summer when we wanted to visit a place in Vienna that was helping Soviet Jews who were coming to freedom out of the old Soviet Union. Now that was the kind of project, Freedom for Soviet Jews, that I had advocated for all through my years in college in Toronto. No matter. In Vienna, the place was on lockdown. No strangers, even Jewish strangers, were allowed. It was too dangerous. Not that long ago, Marcia and I were in Paris on a Friday night, and we decided we wanted to go to Sabbath services. I had the address of the synagogue we wanted to attend. Should have been easy. Not so. We had to call ahead, we had to give them our passport numbers, they had to clear the numbers, then we got permission, and only then were we allowed to go to the service for that Friday evening. Danger and fear, who can you trust? Who can you trust? And so it goes for much of human history. You cannot take goodness for granted. You've got to be on the lookout, because you never know. Except, you probably suspect that I do not live my life so darkly. In fact, as you probably suspect, I would hate for anyone here to live life in such a dark, angry way. I don't do so. I don't live that way because Judaism won't let me give in to despair. Consider Passover. Think about Passover, which opened a week ago on Friday evening with that great Jewish meal, which is called the Seder. On the one hand, you could not find a darker story than the story recalled during the Seder. As the Seder prayer book, the Haggadah, declares, we were slaves to Pharaoh. It was bitter and miserable. One of the necessary foods to be eaten in the Seder is called maror, and maror, a Hebrew word, means bitterness. It comes at the Seder in the form of a horseradish root, which is hard and unpleasant. If you want misery, the Egypt story serves it up grandly. There's even a point in the Haggadah where participants read that oppression has been the lot of Jews not once in Egypt, but again and again over the ages. Pharaoh was only the first in a long line of oppressors. And here's what happens when that recollection is read. Those present at the Seder hold up their wine glasses, read this sad text, and then put down the wine glasses. Not a sip of wine, nothing to take away that bitterness. But here's the genius of the Haggadah. Only a few pages later, the book returns to remember Egyptian slavery and the liberation from Egypt. Then the text proclaims, sure, our adversaries have been formidable, but we have survived. We have overcome the danger, and we have in many, many circumstances been blessed to thrive. At which point, the Haggadah asks everyone present, to lift the cup of wine again, and this time, drink from the cup of wine. Enjoy, sip the sweet wine. Life can be good. In fact, let me share with you what I do at our Shapiro Seder when we get to that point in the Seder. Before we read the text about how we've been blessed and thrived, and before we thank God for our blessings, I ask everyone present to think about his or her own life and to share with all of us at the table a blessing that has touched him or her in the last while. We did it this year, and people gave thanks around the table for personal health, for the health of others, for the presence of children, for the presence of grandchildren, for the presence of a spouse, for success in some kind of business venture, for professional recognition, for a new house, and so on and so on. You see, it turns out that when people are asked to search for blessings, they find them. When people are asked to search for sunlight, they find sunlight. Consider this. The Passover Seder often took place around the time of Easter. And you may know, this year, Easter and Passover coincided last week directly. When this happened in days of yore, Passover often became a dangerous time for Jews. People who had been to church and read about the crucifixion often wanted vengeance. Attacking Jews was not unusual during Passover. Little wonder that Jews kept their doors closed and locked during the Seder. It literally was a dangerous evening. And yet, guess what custom is part of every Seder? At one point during the evening, Jews must open the door of the house. Now that sounds crazy. An open door risks the entry of the enemy. But Jews open the door, and when they do so, they pray during the Seder that Elijah, the biblical prophet of old, Elijah will enter the home to take a sip of wine set aside for him. Now why Elijah? Because according to Judaism, Elijah is the prophet who will announce the coming of the Messiah someday. As dark as the night may be, Judaism asserts that it is never too dark for the Messiah. It is never necessary to give up on a better future. So it goes with the Seder. There are so many reasons to despair about life. Nevertheless, the Seder insists life is always worthwhile. I think it was a little girl named Annie in a red dress in a musical bearing her name who once insisted the sun will come out tomorrow. Or hear it in these sentences, which come towards the beginning of every Seder. The Haggadah proclaims, our story always moves from Ganut l'Shevet. It moves from degradation to praise, from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light. I think it was Anne Frank, a teenager locked in an Amsterdam attic during the Holocaust, who may have put the matter more courageously than I can almost imagine. Here she was, a little Jewish girl, writing these words, locked up in an attic. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually be turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder which will destroy us too. I can feel the suffering of millions. And yet, here's Anne Frank. If I look up into the heavens, I think it will all come right. That this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. And that's my sermon. That's my conviction. Tough as life can be, I believe. Dark as our experience can be, I hold on. Even with the tragedy of Sri Lanka and so many other sadnesses, I can't convince myself to give up. If I look up into the heavens, I think that it will come all right. Not simply, not obviously, but I think it can come out right. There are more blessings than curses. And if on occasion the balance seems off, too many curses, too many or too few blessings, then I've got to hold on, because the blessings will return. Search for a blessing, make a blessing. That's why even the Easter story has two parts. It doesn't end with the crucifixion. It only concludes with the resurrection. Dark gives way to light. Pain gives way to hope. That's where we always need to be going, towards hope. It's a very Jewish, it's actually a very Christian way to travel.